Now we need to turn. As soon as I put that in, it's going to mess with the sound. So we need to fix that. Let's see something. That works. Yeah. No. I'm going to be standing up too much for that. No. All right. Let's just see if the sound works, because sometimes. Just see. It works. Sometimes there's a sound problem when I turn on the microphone. All right. So. Let's think to get out. That's off guys. Hello. All right, Judy. Yes, ma'am. Gee, it doesn't look like blood pressure. Yes. That's why I come for liquid chocolate. No, it's not for that. When you expect something and you don't get it. Here, I got one person here. No.
So I have two questions for you. The first one, I don't know if you could have noticed yesterday, there's a gentleman services that I know, and in the parking lot, I saw you didn't paint the blood. He was sitting in the back with like Dan Rita, this like slender mustache, white hair.
Bob Jacobson, older man.
Yes.
Talks a lot.
Yes.
Bob Jacobson.
And the second question is, how do I go about
Thank you, Julie. I was going to send Melissa. Yeah, well, then I put it in the refrigerator because
I could, I just don't like myself.
no, I found it.
I don't. Waste. I won't get any of that. We called each other?
I just hate to take it.
Yeah. Well, you know what?
I'll take one.
Yeah.
No, I think I've got it. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I've been using it the last few years. It's good. That's not the full one. You have the thicker one. These are the more massively available ones when you want to buy them in quantity. Pick some up. Yeah. It's a good Haggadah. Got another few minutes. Hello? I'm Rabbi Wolf. I'm Rabbi Wolf. Nice to meet you. Okay, hello everyone. Good to see you. I am not Rabbi Kornsgold, as you couldn't tell. I'm Rabbi Michael Wolk. I know most of you. Thank you. I'm glad we don't look exactly alike. Good when you can tell the clergy apart. And I am filling in for Rabbi Kornsgold, who's out of town this week. Just want to go through the attendance and see who's here, who I know and who I don't. Let's see. Maddie's here in person. Barbara's here in person. Megan's here in person. Bunny's here in person. No one, you're here. Howard is here. Stephen, just met you. Nice to see you. Jonathan. You Jonathan? You're Ben Lappin. Okay, you're the guy who drives from far away, right? We spoke a while back. Ben Lappin. Mm-hmm. Oh, Bennett, check you off. Nice to see you. All right, so Jonathan is not here. Okay. Rebecca Edwards is not here yet. Jackie Kaplan is here. Ben Knopfmacher is here. Jen Koss, no. Anima, nice to meet you. Chris Jennifer. Patty. Savannah is not here. Julie Novak, hello. Nice to meet you too. Novak. Stephanie, hello. Heidi is with us on Zoom. Hi, Heidi.
Hi, Rabbi Wolk. How you doing?
Good. How are you feeling?
Getting there. Not quite there yet, but It's a work in progress. Harris is also here with me.
Hi.
He's having some computer issues.
You're doing it together.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Have
we
you
are.
here. All right, Heidi and Harris are with us on Zoom. Kathy is here. Beth is here. Karen will be here. Ben Worth is not here. David Zilber. Hi, David. Nice to see you. And Savannah is here. Great. Okay, well, you've got a whole lot of stuff in front of you on the table. Heidi and Harris, I'm sorry I could not send you the food that we're going to be trying tonight, but we'll have another chance to do it because we're going to be learning about Passover tonight. And I just want to start with some warnings about the food in front of you in case it's an issue for anyone. The red stuff, the charoset, has walnuts in it and wine in it. So that could be problems for some people. Either one of those, and the horseradish, the ground up stuff. We'll talk about in a little bit. It is really strong, as it should be. Our bookkeeper, who is meeting Jewish people for the first time, took a whiff of it when I brought it in and kind of collapsed. So it was quite a sight. But we'll talk about what we're doing with the horseradish. Anyway, I like to begin with the bracha, the blessing over Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, creator of the universe, who has sanctified us with the mitzvot and instructed us to study words of Torah. So Passover starts in about a week and a half, about 2 weeks, and we are all getting ready for it. By a show of hands, how many people are planning on attending a Passover Seder this year? Okay, many of you. If you did not raise your hand and you would like to attend a Passover Seder, talk to me afterwards and we will make that happen. Let's turn in the books to page 98, and we're going to look at some statistics. Every few years, not the Haggadot, the course books, every few years there's a study of the Jewish community in America, and there's certain rituals that the Pew survey looks at to evaluate how observant or how religious or what American Jews are doing. And on page 98 are some of those common statistics. So this is actually 2 studies ago. There was a new one that just came out in 21. But in 2013, the Pew study said that 11% of the Jewish people in America attend synagogue each week. They come into a building like this. I actually think that statistic sounds a little bit high to me, but that's what they reported. It was, but 23% of Jewish people usually light Shabbat candles. So you learned about Shabbat already. So on Friday night, regardless of how they observe Shabbat, the Sabbath, they light candles. 53% of Jews usually fast on Yom Kippur, what we think of as the holiest day of the year, the 25-hour fast, as part of the high holidays. And then 70% of Jews usually attend a Passover Seder. What do you notice about those statistics? Hi, Jen. What's the obvious thing that you notice about those statistics? Almost everybody does Passover, right? American Jews don't agree on too many things, but they seem to agree that the most popular holiday is not Shabbat, that comes every week. That's my favorite holiday personally, or Yom Kippur, which I actually also happen to really find a lot of meaning in, but Passover. I love Passover, but a lot of people do. 70% of American Jews. Now, Seder is not defined. It could just be a family meal. It could be a meal with friends, or it could be a very intense ritual that starts at sundown and goes until the early hours of the morning. So why do you think that is? Why do you think that the Seder is such a popular ritual? Why is it overwhelmingly more than anything else? Beth? Okay, full of traditions and family traditions. So you said 2 things there. One was family. We like reasons to get together. and Passover is one of those key times for Jewish families to get together. And traditions. What's a tradition? Well, what's a tradition in general? What is tradition?
Oh, tradition is something like the family has done and it's done for a long time that it always and things that have kind of get passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah, so things that are passed down that you've done for a long time. So when people, a lot of times people will tell a rabbi, well, I'm not particularly religious, but I like the traditions. I try to explain to them that by doing traditions, you kind of are being religious, but that might be a fine point. But that's that a lot of people don't view themselves as religious Jews, but they view themselves as keeping traditions that have been passed down onto them. So traditions, family. What else? Why else do you think the Seder might be a very popular ritual? Everyone went there. Food. Okay. What about food? What do we do with food at the Seder? Stare at it. You wait for it. Uh-huh. Okay. All right. So there are two types of food at the Seder. There are the ritual foods, the ones that are at the table at the beginning, some of which are in front of you. And there's also the idea of it's a big meal. Part of the Seder, part of the evening, is actually having a lavish dinner. And we know on Shabbat we have a nice meal, three nice meals every Shabbat, but the Passover Seder is supposed to be even more extra. Uh, we spend lots of time preparing for it, shopping for it, making it a very big deal. Okay, so we had traditions, we had family, we had food. What else do you think accounts for the Seder being so popular? DIY, DIY. Okay. Okay. So so do it yourself means that really the character of the Seder is up to whoever's leading it. That the Seders that my great grandparents led in Europe are very different than the Seders that I'm leading now. With younger children, I do a different type of Seder at home than I might have done before we had children. That you can that there's flexibility within the structure of the Seder. There are certain basic guys. There are certain basic kind of requirements for the Seder, but everyone kind of crafts it in their own image. Okay, so related to do it yourself, it's do it yourself because it takes place where? It takes place in your home. You don't have to go anywhere or go to someone's house, but you're going to a friend's house or a family member's house. It doesn't involve coming into a big room full of people at the synagogue, which if only 11% of Jews attend synagogue each week, clearly they prefer to do their traditions from their own homes. So you can do it from anywhere. Now, what's interesting is that in the last few years, maybe the last decade or so, communal seders in synagogues have become extremely popular. It seemed like before the pandemic, they were really growing. I know in Louisville, it got bigger each and every year because many people actually did not want to put the work into doing a seder in their own home. So they brought it back into the synagogue, which kind of defeats the do-it-yourself mindset for it. Mhm. Yeah. Oh yeah, I have nothing against communal seders. I was just pointing it out that traditionally the seder took place at home, but it's kind of moving back into that public space. The synagogue will be hosting one here. Um, okay, so we had traditions, we had food, we had family, we had do it yourself, we had it's at home. Anything else? Any other reason why the seder might be popular? Okay, so it triggers memories. I think that relates to the family and the traditions part, that many people have memories of their grandparents leading Seder, their parents leading Seder. And I can say like in my family, we have the tradition. My dad led the Seder for many years while I was growing up, and he learned how to do it from his Uncle Murray, who I'm named after, and he sings it the way Uncle Murray did. So, and I learned how to sing it like that. So it's this idea of a tradition being passed down. And I never met Uncle Murray, but I carry his name. Thankfully, Michael, not Murray. And his Hebrew name. Yeah. And sorry, I forgot about that. Yes. And but yes, there's a feeling of it stirs memories, and also besides kind of religious memories, besides kind of meaningful memories, you remember the funny things that took place. Like I remember in my house one year when there was always a rule we couldn't hide the afikoman, which we'll get to, in my parents' room. Well, someone hid the afikoman in my parents' room, and then got into a fight with my dad over it, and it broke into many pieces all over the ground, and no one had afikoman that year, and that was a memory of the Seder. So we all have kind of those funny memories as well that aren't so serious. Okay, I can think of one other reason, but any other reasons you can come up with, Howard? Spring cleaning. Okay, that relates to Passover in general. Say more about spring cleaning. Yeah.
Going around making sure you got all the comments with the little feather and everything. I get something, but I don't know anybody who uses a feather other than my wife's crazy, already.
I use a feather. But
But-
thank you for that. Yes. So part of the preparation for the holiday we'll get into it. So it's a good excuse to clean your house, to make it look nice. You put in the spring cleaning term, although there's um, some people would say it's not supposed to be spring cleaning. David and then Julie. There we go. So say more. So David said there's a deep meaning behind the holiday that can be appreciated by Jews all over the place. Heidi, can you hear the people talking at all?
Yes, I can a little bit.
Excellent. Okay. So what is that deeper meaning? Okay. So that was hopefully the one I was actually going for, that the meaning of the Seder is this very actually universal story of we were slaves in Egypt, God took us out, and now we are free, and we are thanking God for that. And can you think of, you probably can, some relatively recent moment in Jewish history where the Passover story was invoked? The civil rights movement could be one. I was actually thinking specifically with your family in the former Soviet Union, Jews being held, Jews being forced to stay in Russia and the Soviet Union, not allowed to practice, and outside Jewish people in America and Israel agitating and protesting on their behalf, and then them finally being allowed to leave. So it's a story that we shape to our own needs. We read it when we look at Jews who are in distress. Jews are being, uh, you know, I don't want to say, not quite enslaved, but imprisoned there. We tend to invoke that story. We also invoke that story when we talk about the civil rights movement. It's not a story that is unique to us. Um, when we talk about civil rights, we talk about going from slavery before civil rights to freedom and full freedom eventually. So, for all of those reasons, Passover is an incredibly observed holiday. Um, I think probably for many people it's the food and the traditions, but go with all of those reasons. So I'm going to take a few minutes and we're going to go over the basic story of Passover, what it is that we are remembering on the Seder night or throughout the holiday. So I think in an earlier lesson, did you talk about the story of the Exodus? Okay, so what's that? Went through the story. All right, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to work in Chavruta. Does Rabbi Kornsgold use the term Chavruta? All right, in Partners, the traditional way of study. And if you go to page 100 and 101, there is a timeline that starts with, and a new king arose over Egypt who did not remember Joseph, the beginning of the book of Exodus. The Jewish people are in Egypt. They were welcomed in during the time of Joseph, and then a new king rises up who didn't know Joseph, a new Pharaoh. And it ends with, on the other side, Exodus chapter 14, the Israelites marched through the sea on dry ground. Thus did Adonai, God, deliver them from Egypt. The very end of the Passover story, the splitting of the sea, the Israelites walk through on dry land and the Egyptians drown and they're finally safe. But there's a whole lot that goes in between. So I'm going to ask you to get into groups. Does Rabbi Kornsgold usually divide you, or do you guys figure it out yourself? All right, you can figure it out yourself. You're going to spend 5 minutes writing in the events on this timeline. If you need a cheat sheet, you can flip to the next page and you can look at the Exodus, a story in 7 short chapters by Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt. But see what you can come up with. See which parts of the story you can come up with. So take a few minutes now and work on this. See if you can remember the 10 Commandments. Okay, let's come back together. So, first of all, I will just say that traditionally, if you go to a yeshiva or a seminary or any place where Jews are learning, we study in what's called a Beit Midrash, a study hall, and the traditional format of studying was called chavruta and shiur. Chavruta is the study time with a partner preparing for something, and the shiur is the class that follows that. And the sound of the Beit Midrash is kind of exactly what you just heard when you break up. It's that low mumble of people talking to each other, all talking about the same thing but saying different things. And to someone who's used to traditional Jewish study, that's just an absolutely incredible sound. There are jokes and smiles with it also. It's kind of one of my favorite parts of Jewish study, and something that I have not heard a whole lot of in the last 2 years. So it's great to hear that. So the Passover story. Passover story is found in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, the book of Shmot. But as I said over here, for many people, their way of knowing the Passover story is the movie The Ten Commandments. How many people have seen the Ten Commandments? How many people have seen the Prince of Egypt? Ten Commandments gets a few more. Ten Commandments was growing up. It was broadcast every year on TV before Passover. It still is. You'll probably find it on YouTube. Charlton Heston as Moses, Yul Brynner as Pharaoh, and it was like a classic. And so many people think of that as their point of reference. Okay, so let's do a quick run through of the story. A new king comes to power in Egypt who doesn't know Joseph. The Israelites are spreading and growing. They come down to Egypt with 70 people, but by this point, however many years it is later, they are a nation full of thousands and thousands of people. New Pharaoh comes to power. What does he do? Gets nervous. What does he get nervous about? Mm-hmm. Sorry, what was that? So the word I think of is that he demagogues. He goes to his people, the Egyptians, and says, "There's this other group of people living among us, and they're getting stronger and more powerful, and they're going to take over. They're gonna throw me out of power. They're going to throw us out of power. They're coming to get us. If we don't do something about it right now, they're gonna take over, and we're gonna lose our country." And Pharaoh sets the tone for countless leaders in Jewish history who did exactly the same thing to the Jewish people. As recently as Hitler in World War II, it's pretty much exactly what he said: is that there's this group of people. They're not us, but they live among us. They're too powerful. We blame them for our problems. So Pharaoh set a trend. So Pharaoh, demagogues, riles up his people against the Jewish people, against the Israelites. Then he starts to take action. Once he gets his people angry, once he gets them worked up, what does he do next? He starts to pass decrees, laws. Anyone know what are the laws he passes? Okay, hold on. Raise your hand. Someone. Okay, so one of them is that he approaches the midwives and tells them to murder all Jewish boys born before they even see their parents. And the midwives bravely refuse to do that. Their names are Shifra and Puah. They're mentioned once in the Torah, and they are real heroes of the story, that they refuse to do what Pharaoh orders them to do, and then they lie about it. They tell him that the Israelite women are too strong, and they give birth before they even have a chance to show up, and they know that the babies are alive. So that doesn't work. So what is the next thing that he does? Well, we skipped a few steps there. Okay, so but you're getting there. So if he can't, if the midwives aren't going to kill all the babies, going to have everybody else do that. He says, whenever a Jewish male baby is born, toss him into the Nile River, drown him. So they're born. That's the law. You can't hide a baby for too long. Now, at the same time, he's also putting them to work as slaves. He's having them build two cities, Pitom and Ramses. This is where the slavery part comes in, and the pyramids are pictured here. And has anyone been to Egypt? Has anyone seen the pyramids? They're pretty cool. You should go see if you have a chance. Some people say that that's what the Jewish slaves built. Probably not, because it's described as cities that they're building, not pyramids. But some other people, we don't know. We don't know. Puts them to work as slaves. So trying to actually murder them and trying to break their spirits by enslaving them. All right, then we get up to the birth of one particular baby, a baby who doesn't have a name when he's born, and his mother hides him for 3 months until she can no longer keep him hidden. And when she can no longer keep the baby hidden, she puts the baby in a basket and floats him down the Nile. And his sister watches as the basket floats away carrying this 3-month-old baby. And it floats down and it comes to an area near the palace where the daughter of Pharaoh comes out to go into the river to bathe. And she sees this little ark floating down the Nile and reaches out her hand and pulls it in and finds this baby and decides that she's going to adopt the baby. Another one of those really heroic characters, because commentators want to know, did she know this was a Jewish baby that she was taking into the palace? Probably, yeah. I don't know why else there would be a baby floating down the Nile. So she takes him in and she gives him the name that we are familiar with in English, Moses, in Hebrew, Moshe. And Moshe comes from the Hebrew, min hamayim mishitihu, from the water I drew him. And she raises him as her own son in the palace. And somehow, this was what you asked about, Moses grows up and he knows that he is not an Egyptian. He seems to know that he's an Israelite or a Jewish person. And he goes out and he sees the Israelites suffering, being enslaved. So he's grown up, he goes out for the first time. Back to you guys. What does he see? Okay. It's in the movie. Okay. So he sees an Egyptian taskmaster and a Jewish guy fighting. And by fighting, I mean the Egyptian taskmaster is beating up the Jewish slave. And so what does he do? He kills the taskmaster, buries him in the sand. He thinks he did a good deed. And next day he goes out again and he sees this time 2 Jewish people fighting. And he tries to stop them. And one of them turns to him and in a sneering voice says, "Are you going to kill me like you killed that guy yesterday?" And so Moses knows that people know that he killed the Egyptian. And he decides to run away because he's scared for his life. He thinks Pharaoh, his adopted grandfather, is going to kill him. And he runs across the desert to the land of Midian. And as many stories in the Bible go, he meets a nice girl at the well. It seemed like a great place to meet people for all the patriarchs. So he goes there as well. And her name is Tzipporah. She's one of 7 daughters to a man named Yitro, who is the local priest of Midian. And they get married, and Moses starts to serve as a shepherd to his father-in-law. And he's forgotten about his life in Egypt, and he's forgotten about the Israelites. But God, this is where God comes into the story. God hasn't forgotten about the Israelites. The Israelites are suffering. They're crying out to God. God finally says, now I'm going to intervene. So one day Moses is in the desert with his sheep, and he sees a very strange sight, something that shouldn't be taking place. What does he see? He sees a burning bush, a bush that is caught on fire, but it's not being burnt down. It just keeps on burning. And he approaches it, and God speaks to him out of the bush. The first thing that God says to Moses is, "Take your shoes off because this is holy ground," which is interesting because Jews wear shoes when we go into our synagogues, in contrast to say Muslims who go into a mosque and take their shoes off. But we have this passage there, and God sends Moses on the mission. Go to Pharaoh and say those famous words. What's he going to say to Pharaoh? Let my people go. But there's a second part to that sentence. Let my people go, that they may serve me. Not only will they be physically free, but they're going in to enter into this covenant with God, to enter into a relationship with God. Does Moses want to go? Absolutely not. Does not want to go back to Egypt. And so God gives Moses encouragement. He pushes him to go. He tells him that Aaron, his brother, will serve as his speaker, will be his assistant when he is not able to speak because he has a speech impediment. He gives Moses these miraculous signs to show to Pharaoh and to show to the Jewish people to prove that God sent him. Still, Moses doesn't want to go, but eventually he gives in. And he goes back to Egypt. He meets up with Aaron, and he goes to Pharaoh, and he says, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh says, that's from a song, right? I had that in my head before you said it. Do you know what it's from? They're afraid. No, 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 I will not let them go. Okay. So this part I'm going to zoom through. Pharaoh says no, and God says, well, you're going to suffer. I'm going to force you to let them go. And this is when God, through Moses and Aaron, sends the 10 plagues, which we'll talk about a little bit later, against Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And each time, each plague is worse and worse for the Egyptians. They're suffering until by the end of the plagues, all of the Egyptians are telling Pharaoh, let the Jewish people go. We don't want them here. It's not worth it. We're suffering. You're killing us. But Pharaoh is taking himself to destruction. He refuses to let them go as it gets worse and worse. And then finally, the 10th plague is the death of the firstborn. Every firstborn, human and child, is struck down in the middle of the night. Howard? Because he had to let them go. Part of the story is Pharaoh's fall. If he died, he wouldn't be there to see them go free. So part of it is his humbling. Now that night when all of the firstborn, the Egyptian firstborn, as you point out, are killed, is the very last night of the slavery in Egypt. And that's the night that we commemorate each year on the first night of Passover. That's the night that we have the first Seder, 14th day of Nisan. And the Jews in Egypt also had to prepare. They also had to get ready for this because before this could happen, they were told each family to take a lamb into their homes. And on this day, they were going to slaughter it. So that's how they had food. They were going to do a few things with it. They would take the blood, some of the blood, and what do they do with the blood? They put it on the doorposts of their homes. Why are they doing this? All right, so one is so it helps the angel or God actually pass over their houses. It marks this as a Jewish house. So this was actually an incredibly brave thing to do because they were marking the Jewish homes that are going to be safe. And this sets the precedent for what do we do now instead of blood on our doors? We have a mezuzah. Have you guys learned about the mezuzah yet? So every Jewish home has a mezuzah on the doorpost. It's that little box that has a scroll in it with the Shema, one of our holiest texts, and it marks it as this is as a Jewish home. And it's supposed to remind us of the Israelites who did this in Egypt. And they're like the Israelites who took a certain amount of risk. Sometimes Jews have taken a risk to identify their homes as Jewish homes. Then they take that lamb and they're supposed to eat it with their families and with their neighbors as a festive meal. They offer it as a sacrifice to God. That's the killing part and the cooking part. And this was called the Korban Pesach, the Passover sacrifice. And they eat it. They're told to eat it together with bitter herbs, in Hebrew, maror, word we're going to come back to, and matzah, another word we're going to come back to. And they're told to eat this with their bags on their backs, their walking sticks in their hands, their sandals on, like they're about to leave. They have this meal, this is their last meal in Egypt. The next morning, in the middle of the night, all the Egyptians wake up and realize that a large percentage of the population has dropped dead, and there's a great scream throughout Egypt. And Pharaoh calls to Moses and Aaron immediately and says, "Get out, enough, you win." So the Israelites, the Jewish people, march victoriously out the next morning after hundreds of years of slavery. So it's a little bit confusing on that point. So they're told it actually, matzah has multiple meanings in Jewish tradition. It's both the bread that they ate in Egypt when they were slaves, because it stayed in their stomach. But the more common story that we know is that we eat it to remember that they left so quickly they didn't have time to let the bread rise. And so they had this unleavened bread, which would not have looked anything like the matzah that we have. But we'll go with it anyway. So they march out. They think they're free. But 3 days later, Pharaoh changes his mind. What have I done? I've just crippled my country. I sent the workforce out. I've got no one to blame for all the problems. He summons his army, his chariots, and they chase after the Israelites, and they catch up to them at the Sea of Reeds, in Hebrew Yam Suf. We often say the Red Sea, but that's a mistranslation. It's the Sea of Reeds. The Red Sea is actually something else. And they trap the Jewish people with the army on one side and the sea on the other, with nowhere to go, and they think they're going to be slaughtered. And the people panic for the first of many times, and they think, "You took us out of Egypt, now we're going to get slaughtered here. We're going to be massacred." And God tells them to move forward and tells Moses to raise his arm, raise his staff over the water. Moses does it, and that's the scene where the water splits on both sides, forming two walls, and the Israelites are able to pass through on dry land. They get to the other side, and the Egyptians follow them through, and the water comes crashing down, drowning the Egyptians, probably Pharaoh as well. And and finally, they're free. Finally, they know that they're never going to see the Egyptians again, that they're never going back. And they break into song and dance. And the song that they sing actually is recorded in the Torah, and we chant it each morning as part of the morning service. It's called the Song of the Sea, or in Hebrew, Az Yashir Moshe. So that's the Passover story in probably less time than it takes some people at the Seder, more than many. Any questions on the story?
If you're looking at the story in certain chapters, that people did not leave Egypt alone. A multitude went with them. Does that mean that some Egyptians left with them and other than Hebrews?
So yeah,
were
it seems that a fair number of Egyptians decided to hitch their wagons to the Jewish train and left with them and joined them. Mhm.
Now, I understand
Yeah.
that, not for us alone, because I thought that was referring to the you know,
Mhm.
choice there.
So,
You know, freedom of slave.
no, so that's actually in the Torah, that some Egyptians chose to go with the Israelites. They thought it was a good way to a good way to live, and they were tired of Pharaoh as well. They wanted to be on that side. Yeah. So what Patty asked, if you couldn't hear, was if lamb was the first Seder, why don't we generally eat it now? I think that our Seder, well, it's expensive and hard to find, is one reason. But another practical reason is that we are reenacting the Korban Pesach, the Passover sacrifice, but we're also supposed to make some kind of differences to show that this is not actually the Passover sacrifice that we're eating. We tend to not eat that. We'll get to the Seder plate, the shank bone. Although, how many of us use actual lamb bones? You can get those. Okay. Ooh. Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh.
That it was also God said, step in and I will, that he would protect them.
Yeah.
And so there was one man who stepped in, and once he showed faith to God.
So that's one of the stories, one of the midrashim, one of the legends about the splitting of the sea, that God tells them to go forward, and that nobody's willing to go. And one man named Nachshon, who was from the tribe of Judah, was the only one among the whole nation who was willing to step into the water. And he goes into the water, and he's going in up to his knees, up to his waist, up to his chin. And only when the water gets up to his nose does it split, because God wanted to see the Jewish people take a bit of a leap of faith. Said, I can't do everything for you. You got to do something yourself. So that's one of the midrashim, the legends that we teach about that story. But that's not in the Torah itself.
You mentioned that the people called Israelites. This is before they went to Israel. They originally called Israelites, or I have something wrong.
So they're called, in the story, they're called Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, and it's because they are descended from Jacob, whose other name was Israel. And that's where the name Israel comes from. So the land wasn't called Israel yet. but they're a descendant of Israel, the person. They were also called Hebrews. They were not called Jews. Jews would be an anachronistic term, but they were called the children of Israel, or they were called Hebrews. Yeah. They did. Back when it was 70 of them. So they had lived there, but not as a giant nation. They lived there as a family or a tribe, and they were coming back in greater number. So Passover, when we observe Passover today, it is a reenactment and a commemoration of the experience of leaving Egypt. We're supposed to remember that feeling of going from slavery to freedom, and it's such an important part of Jewish tradition. We kind of reflect on that every week. It's one of the reasons why we observe Shabbat. Not only the story of God creating the world in 6 days and resting on the seventh, but also because we are free people and free people can choose to take a day of rest. So we choose to take Shabbat. But on Passover is the time we specifically recall it on the night that it happened on the Jewish calendar. Passover is a holiday that takes a lot of preparation because God tells us in the Torah for 7 days. Originally, Passover was a 7-day holiday. Here in the United States and outside of Israel, it's an 8-day holiday. For 7 days, you should only eat matzah, not chametz. So, what is chametz? Don't think I've used that term yet. You can flip to page 104. Okay, so leavened bread. So chametz is products that are leavened. What does leaven mean? That's okay. It's one of those words you would only know if you're a Jewish person, right? There's certain English words we say that normal people don't use. So I also gave each of you a Passover guide from the Rabbinical Assembly that is that is really great details about getting ready for Passover. But their definition of chametz says that the Torah prohibits, this is on bottom of page 6, the Torah prohibits the ownership of chametz, which is flour, food, or drink made from the prohibited species of leavened grain, which are wheat, oats, barley, rye, or spelt during Passover. So any product that has one of those grains, wheat, oat, barley, rye, or spelt, is chametz. So can you think of a product that is not bread, but is chametz? Crackers, cereal, beer, okay. Whiskey, if you like whiskey, whiskey is chametz because it's made specifically from grain. So there are some products that are clearly chametz. Now there's another term on this page called kitniot. Kitniot are translated as legumes, which are beans. And Jews of Ashkenazi descent, Jews of European descent, have added over time to the list of foods that we don't eat because we are gluttons for punishment. And it includes things like beans and rice and corn, most commonly. Things that at one point could have been ground up to make a grain-like substance because you might confuse them for chametz. So Ashkenazim took that upon ourselves. Now, what's fascinating is that in Israel, where Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, Middle Eastern Jews, are so much more kind of interconnected and live among each other, more and more Ashkenazim are starting to eat kitniot because they're available there. Some American Jews of Ashkenazi descent are, but it hasn't really gained so much traction because people go back to the traditions they're used to. If they grew up observing Passover in one way, they feel it would be very strange to start eating rice now. For me, that's always the case. But besides the food that we don't eat, Passover is a time of intense preparation. And that's what Howard mentioned before about the spring cleaning. So we prepare our houses for Passover by getting rid of all the chametz products, all of the products that were cooked with chametz or contain chametz themselves, and by cleaning every part of the kitchen, every part of the house that might have had chametz in it, and we don't even use the same dishes that we use during the year. Many people have completely different sets of dishes for meat and for dairy that they use on Passover with non-chametz. Some dishes can be what's called kashered, and if reset, um, reused for Passover. And this gets into some of the way we talk about keeping kosher, or kashrut, kosher law. And the way that you reset a dish or a tray is through heat, because we think that flavor transfers from the food onto the dish, whatever it is, through the application of heat. So when you want to kosher something, you kosher it the way that you used it with heat. So for example, I use the examples that they have here. Baking dishes and grills or ovens, I'll use a particular. An oven is a great example because most of us only have one oven in our house and we need it for Passover to cook. So what does an oven use to cook food? Heat. It turns it up. So we'll scrub the oven, we'll clean it out as best as we can. The walls and the grates, kind of get off all the stuff that accumulates over the course of the year. And when it's ready, we either run it on a self-cleaning cycle, which I hear is actually dangerous, or turn it up to its maximum temperature. And the idea is that it kind of burns off anything that's in there. And that resets the oven. That makes it kosher for Passover. The same thing for like a stove top is thoroughly cleaning it off and turning on the heat. Um, if you're using like a baking pan that goes into it, you would clean it thoroughly, a metal baking pan, I should say, and then put it in the oven at that maximum heat. And some people, this is when you'll see they'll go around with a blowtorch. If there's like an area that needs a little extra cleaning, a little extra detail, they'll use the blowtorch to get at that particular area. Some rabbis have a lot of fun with that. I'm not crazy about blowtorches. Um, Now, everyone observes Passover differently. Uh, for some people, Passover is just not eating bread, and they don't do anything about changing over their house. I grew up in a fairly, strict traditional home, and like we said about passing traditions down, I, uh, I do Passover the way that I learned how to do it. So, for example, I cover my countertops. Any place where food might come into contact with, um, I will cover. So we use contact paper to cover, and it's awful because it's impossible to get up afterwards. And we close off cabinets that have dishes that we're not using for Passover, and we bring up or down from the attic at this point dishes that are specifically for Passover. As I said, everyone has a slightly different way of preparing their house for Pesach, and the guide that I gave you is a good description of kind of a conventional way of preparing for Passover. It's the Rabbinical Assembly Guide. It also has in it, when you get to a section about foods, and Heidi, I will get you a copy of this. It's also online.
No.
Second. It also has a list of which foods need what's called a special Passover hechsher. So if you look at products in stores, they have a kosher symbol. Often, the most common one is the Orthodox Union, the OU. It's the U inside the O. And if you look at, for example, the grape juices on the table, you'll see in the corner the OU, and next to it is a P. It stands for Passover. And that means that this didn't come into contact with any kind of food that had chametz. Some foods need to have Passover hechshers. Some of them, if you bought them before Passover, don't necessarily need a Passover hechsher. Fresh foods do not. Some things we absolutely don't eat on Passover. No, you're not supposed to use something that you opened before Passover on Passover, even though it doesn't need a hechsher. Um, Now, one of the ways that we get rid of chametz before Passover, and this is an example of a legal fiction, a legal loophole that was came into being to make Passover a little more manageable. Let's say you have something in your house that's chametz that is particularly expensive that you don't want to get rid of, that would incur a big loss of money for you. What can you think of that might fall into that category? Liquor is the prime example of it. Um, and so created this idea of michirat chametz, of selling chametz. Many Jewish people will commission the rabbi of the synagogue in advance of Passover to sell all of the chametz products in their house. They'll put them away, put them out of sight, that are specifically for Passover. And then the rabbi will gather all of the people from the community who want to do this and will ceremonially sell those products to someone who is not Jewish. Because there's nothing wrong with these products. They're very good. As Jewish people, we're just not allowed to own them or have them over Passover. So it is, as I said, it's a legal fiction. It's a legal loophole to protect things that we would not want or be able to get rid of or replace easily. So getting ready for Passover includes a number of different ways of dealing with chametz. And so, for example, last year when I sold chametz for the community, I sold it to Minister James Howell from Myers Park Methodist, who owned all of the chametz products of the community for that week. And then at the end of the holiday, I buy them back from him. And it's whoever it is who I've selected always thinks it's very humorous, because it kind of is. Stephanie? You put it away someplace. It stays in your house. You kind of select the cabinets that you're going to close off or the closets that you're going to close off, and you put everything in there. And what was that? Rubbermaid totes. Put a big sticker on it. Tape is an important Passover tool. Because you're not supposed to own it yourself. It's supposed to be in somebody else's possession. What do you mean? Yeah, so that's what you're selling. That's the stuff that you're keeping in your house, the stuff that you're not getting rid of. If you wanted to take everything in your house and lock it in, put it in one place and sell it, you could do that. But often it's a good reason to clean out your fridge on a very practical side. So again, different people save different things. Like in my house growing up, we always had a section in the freezer that was covered over with the stuff that was we had like the frozen bagels in there that we would eat after Passover, and we sold them and then bought them back, and they were right there available. You can't. A few negatives in there. Yeah, even if it's outside your house, if you still own it, it's still your chametz. So like that's, for example, why when I have the list of people on the contract, I include the synagogue, or a lot of people will tell me, give me their office addresses to do it. And it's fascinating. One of the things that's very interesting, I said everyone does Passover differently or their own way or their own strictures. There are many people who don't keep kosher during the year, who take a stricter level of kashrut on themselves for Passover. Again, similar to the Seder, it's a very observed holiday. So that I will sell chametz for people who I know don't keep remotely kosher, but on Passover they're choosing to take it on themselves because they're going to take that holiday seriously. And it's, to me, there's something really very moving when I talk to parents or I talk to kids who go to school and have like a matzah sandwich that all of their classmates see. Sometimes they complain about it, but I'm always really very impressed when kids are able to do that. And kids have a hard time on Passover. Yes. Well, I went to Jewish day school, so I was always off for Passover. So the public schools were closed in Plainview Old Bethpage. All of Long Island was closed. They're not closed anymore on Passover. No, I don't think so. It's been a while, but I don't think so. I don't think so. You'll find out. So the main observance we're yeah, there is actually the way that it's set up is that there's a contract that's written in like fancy legal language, and basically there is a price set that the person who's buying it has to deliver. You said it like $1 million or something, and then he or she will hand over $1 or $5 and say that's a down payment on it, and that if by X date after Passover he hasn't delivered the remaining balance, the sale is canceled. It's humorous. Jews, yes, the $5 deposit. It is like, so there are a number of legal fictions in Judaism that sound a little bit silly, and they come from Jews. Often they arise to address specific problems. As I said, this might have been risen to address the problem, the question of expensive alcohol. Some people think that they're silly, that they're cheating, and if people want to go ahead and really get rid of all the chametz from their house, more power to them. That is to really take it seriously like that and do that. On the other hand, it also reflects a willingness to kind of engage with the system, that there's the system of Jewish practice, and that we are still following the rules and figuring out how to work with them. But it is a strange sounding thing. Yes, that too. We're in a different place. Yeah. hmm hmm Yeah, so we've come up with those, and that's a really important point, that many of the laws about food came into being before there was refrigeration, before we could save food, also before we had large pantries full of packaged goods, um, supermarkets to go to. So we just have more food in our houses readily accessible than people did thousands of years ago. So the rules are trying to keep up with how we live our lives. So I want to, does Rabbi Kornskold give a break usually? Take 5. Because then we go into the Seder. Yeah. Mhm. Very nice to meet you. I feel like I've heard your name. You've been around here for a long time. Yeah. You're welcome to come to services anytime. What inspired you to take this class? Okay. Yeah. Good. Did you grow up? Well, you moved here in '81. Where did you grow up? Okay, so you're a Southerner. Okay. Got it. All right. South all the way through. I'm a New Yorker, so this was heading south. Yeah, I was in Kentucky for 8 years before this. Louisville. I did, but I like the bigger Jewish community. It's grown. It's grown from what I understand. Thank you. Yeah. What year? I do not know. Do you know? Uh, I don't try to put dates on the Torah. I'm not into like guessing when it happened or those types of questions. It's definitely longer than 2,000 years ago. Yeah, I think they guess about 3,000 years. They would estimate. Uh, Definitely before, yes, before the Common Era. Uh-huh. Well, it starts with the same book, but translations of the Torah, not the original. Not Hebrew, but the Torah, but if the Christians use their translations instead are based on Latin, so it's a translation of a translation. The King James is not a translation from the Hebrew. Might be from the Greek. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. Well, the New Testament were written at different. The Gospels were written at different times themselves. Yeah. Let me get this started because I'm already running too late. Okay, let's come back together. I tend to talk a lot, so I'm running behind what I had set. So we're going to spend some time talking about the Passover Seder, that commemoration of the night that we left Egypt. Now, originally, Passover is a 7-day holiday, and there was one Passover Seder. If you go to Israel today, they still observe one Passover Seder. Outside the land of Israel, we observe two Passover Seders, the first and second nights of the holiday, although like many things, more people do one Seder than the second. Uh, so biblical holidays, holidays that come from the Torah, are their X day of X month on the Jewish calendar. And at a certain point before the calendar was set, it wasn't clear to communities farther away from Israel where they were setting the calendar what was the right day to begin the month. A month can either be 29 or 30 days on the Jewish calendar, and that affects the day of the holiday starts by is either one day or the next, depending on when the new month starts. So, farther away from Israel, they started observing the holiday for 2 days to make sure they got it right. And then the custom stuck. Rosh Hashanah is 2 days in Israel also. That's the only one that's an exception. I had a fight with an Israeli once in America who, said that he does Rosh Hashanah the Israeli way. That's one day. I said, it's 2 days too. And he, being very Israeli, refused to back down and said it was one day, but it's 2 days. So we observe two Passover Seders. And that's why, for example, this year, a lot of people will, go to a friend's house or do their own Seder one night and go to a communal Seder another night. Some people will go to the people's house um, both nights. Now, a Seder has some things in common with Shabbat dinner that we do every week, but there's a whole lot more ritual and a whole lot more special food because for Shabbat dinner, what do you need to get it started? Candles, you need wine for Kiddush, and you need challah. So, yes, we like candles on Passover to start the holiday. We got plenty of wine. We're going to have more wine than Shabbat. No challah. Instead, we have matzah. So we have, you can look at it in front of you, one it's under the napkins. Matzah, this is an example of the unleavened bread. Now this is, don't eat it yet. If you ever wanted the bread of affliction, we're feeling afflicted. This is actually egg matzah made with egg mixed into it, which traditionally we wouldn't eat on Passover itself. There's a tradition of not eating matzah before Passover, so we use egg matzah that's kind of not real matzah. And that's part of the preparation. So on the table, on Shabbat, you have 2 challahs, right? You talk about that? 2 loaves of bread. On Pesach, you have 3 matzahs. So each one of those plates has 3 matzahs. And each one is going to have a ritual purpose in the Seder. Now, if you look at page 106 in the book, you have the Seder plate. And that's what I sort of recreated on the table in front of you, the ritual items that we use. And each one of these might have a few different meanings to it. Actually, the most confusing one, starting on the left, is the roasted egg. No one's entirely sure what the egg is doing on the Seder plate. But it's well, so it could represent life. It could represent circular, that life is, things are cyclical. It actually represents, probably originally, another one of the sacrifices that was offered, a sacrifice that was offered in the ancient temples on every holiday. But we're kind of confused about that part. So what we do is you boil it first, and then you roast it. So we put it in the broiler, and if you leave it in too long, it will crack, and we don't want to do that. But that's why. Well, yeah, that's why you boil it first. Good, practical. Hashtag Jewish life skills, as I like to say. The other side of the Seder plate is the roasted lamb shank bone. If you can get lamb, you can get lamb. Sometimes people will use chicken. That's the next best choice. Chick Lieberman's has shank bone, so I have one. And that's also supposed to roast. It has all of the meat taken off, and that represents that Passover sacrifice that the Israelites offered in Egypt, and that's the way Jews observed Passover until the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem by offering the sacrifice. Now that is on the table as a memory. Charoset, the apple in the middle, is a mixture. It's red, and it's supposed to represent the bricks or the mortar that the Israelite slaves used, which makes it ironic that it's actually sweet. So everyone has their own charoset recipe. The one that I made for you guys has apples, walnuts, sugar, cinnamon, and Manischewitz Concord grape wine. So as I said, it's got nuts and it's got wine in it, but you can make charoset without either of those things. Then on the right side of that plate is karpas. And karpas is often translated as a green vegetable. I would translate it as a spring vegetable. And it's supposed to represent exactly that, the springtime, because Passover is the springtime holiday. It takes place in the spring. And again, when we talk about traditions, this is something that every family has their own vegetable. In my house growing up, it was boiled potatoes, which are not remotely green, or shouldn't be. And that's why you have those in front of you, probably because my family came from Poland. Other people will use celery or parsley. Parsley is particularly unsatisfying because that's the first thing you're going to eat for a while at the Passover Seder. Maror and chazeret are bitter herbs, and there are 2 versions of the bitter herbs. Often you'll have 2 different things. So for chazeret, a lot of people will use romaine lettuce. that is, I don't know, how would you describe the taste of romaine lettuce? Think it's bitter? It doesn't taste like much to me, actually. More than iceberg lettuce, but, and maror, there's a picture here of a horseradish root, which is what most Ashkenazim use for maror, horseradish. And a lot of people will use kind of that Gold's jar, the prepared horseradish. I think that's cheating, and I will actually use a real horseradish root, which we're going to taste, and I'll be curious to see how it goes for everybody. Yeah. So now it's more common. I think that was kind of became more common to add that in. It's just a different type of maror. It's a different version of it. Probably came from a different tradition than ours originally, and then kind of as Jews merged together, traditions got combined and recombined. So you also have on the side of the Seder plate a dish of salt water. You've got that on the table with you guys. And salt, what do you think of when you think of salt water? Tears. Tears of the Israelites, the bitterness of slavery. So you have some sweet items and some bitter items mixed together. We also, on Passover, instead of drinking 1 cup of wine for Kiddush, we drink 4 cups of wine over the course of the Seder night. So pace yourselves. And we talk about traditions and rituals and practices. For a long time, Jews made fun of what was passed for kosher wine, which was this stuff, Manischewitz, Concord grape, which will hurt your stomach. And probably anyone grow up drinking this stuff at the Seder? Yeah, traditions. Now there are really many very good kosher wines, especially from Israel, and so people will, to make it festive, will choose wine that that they really enjoy, maybe like a different bottle for each cup of wine, and each cup of wine represents a different level of redemption. The idea that God redeemed us in stages, and that we are may not fully have reached redemption yet. Now, there's also a 5th cup of wine that we don't drink. It sits on the table the entire evening. You make a big, fancy, decorative goblet out of it, and you put it there and you fill it, and that is known as Elijah's cup, Kos Eliyahu in Hebrew. And Eliyahu is a prophet from the Tanakh, from the Bible, and tradition teaches that Elijah is going to announce the beginning of the Messianic age. And so when we get to the end of the Passover Seder, we're going to open the door for Elijah. He's a very busy guy going to all of these Seders and drinking all of this wine, but the idea is that as we talk about the past redemption, as we talk about God freeing us from slavery in Egypt, we're hoping that after telling over the story, Elijah is going to come and the world is going to go to a perfected place, or whatever we believe the Messiah is going to bring. So we open the door very optimistically at the end, and that cup is not drunk during the Seder. We have the matzah, we have the Seder plate, we have the cup of Elijah, we have our own wine, we have the salt water. A few other things that you need for a Seder. Some of them are listed on page 107. People like to add new meanings to the Seder. I talked about how we use the story of the Exodus from Egypt to understand later stories. So some people will put what they call Miriam's cup on the table next to Elijah's cup. A recent innovation, remembering that Miriam, Moses' sister, had a well in the desert that the Israelites relied on for water throughout their time traveling. So reflecting on her role, it's an effort to emphasize some of the female characters in the Torah who often are left out of the story. Another custom, which, and there's debate about what it's actually for, is putting an orange on the Seder plate. And you see it says that suggested by Susanna Heschel in the 1980s as a way of calling attention to the exclusion of LGBTQ people from Jewish life. And it's become a symbol for all marginalized groups. So some people like to really, when they think of a Seder, like to really stick close to the traditional form of a Seder, to talk about the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And some people like to use that as a springboard to talk about other themes that might be related to the day. And said each Seder is different. Goes back to do it yourself. You design the Seder that is right for you. Now, perhaps most importantly, is the book that we use. This book, and this is an example of a Haggadah, kind of the Siddur, the prayer book for the evening. Haggadah means telling over. We tell over the Passover story. Now, I skipped this when I started it, but what does Seder mean? What does the word mean? Anyone know? Seder means order, because there's an order for the evening. It's related to the word for prayer book, Siddur, which is the order of the prayers. And this book has in it a table of contents. So go in the Haggadah to page 6, and it's in the Heidi. This is on page 105 in the course book. And we're going to act out some parts of the Seder. So we open with the Simanei HaSeder, the steps of the Seder, to remind everyone there what we're going to do. And this has a melody that I'm going to sing and then ask you guys to sing it with me. It's got the transliteration there. Kadesh Orchatz Karpas Yachatz Magir Rachza Motzi Matzah Maror Korech Shulchan Orech Tzafon Barech Hallel Nirtzah. You got the idea of it. We'll work on singing something else later. We recite the order of the Seder so everybody knows what's coming. And then we dive in. So in front of you, there's some bottles of grape juice and some cups. I'd like everyone to get a little shot of grape juice. Don't drink it yet, but pour it out. I'm going to use the big one.
No, it's 9 and we have, because of the, thing.
They, the editors want us out.
Well, in that case, all right. So here's what we're going to. I'm going to make this a little bit more concise. Give you this will be the shortened Seder. So the Seder starts with Kiddush, just like on Friday night, and it's a similar text. And Kiddush is one of those melodies that people are very familiar with, but it's a different melody for the Seder night. And traditionally, people would stand up while they make Kiddush. So everyone, please rise. And we make the Kiddush, and then you sit down before you drink. And I'll just give you a taste of the melody on the first part, on the Borei Pri Hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei Peri Hagafen. You sit down, people will lean or recline when they drink. And Jewish music, liturgical music, if you're tuned into it, it's supposed to tell you exactly where you are, exactly what's happening. So when you think about the melody for Shabbat Kiddush, like Ivanu v'acharta v'yotanu kidashta, that's very familiar. That tells you it's Shabbat. But what I just chanted is very specific to Passover and to Yantiv, to Sukkot and Shavuot also, and it has this motif in it that I did. That melody is woven in throughout the liturgy on the holidays. Okay. What's the best way to do this? We go through the steps of the Seder. We wash our hands. We know that we wash our hands ritually before we eat bread, whenever we eat bread. Here at the Seder, we wash our hands twice. The first time, we don't say a blessing. In Jewish and ritual hand washing, it's often start with a cup that looks like this on two handles. This is not for hygiene, it's for ritual purposes. You pour it over one side of the hand, then the other, and like that. And during the Seder, there's a custom of actually washing the hands of the person next to you. So we're acting like royalty. Someone else is washing your hands for you. So it'll be this kind of awkward maneuver of passing the cup around the table and doing that. Then we get to the karpas, the green vegetable, in this case the white vegetable, the potato. So everyone grab a karpas. There are plates and forks there also. Yeah. So you take the potato, dip it in the salt water. And in the Haggadah on page 10, we say the blessing over fruit of the earth. It's in the middle of page 10. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri ha'adamah. Dip it in the salt water. That affects the bitterness of Egypt, the tears of the Israelites. Napkins are helpful. All right. Now look at the matzahs in front of you, 3 of them. Take the middle matzah. Look at the middle one and break it in half. Half of it goes back. Half of it is going to be hidden away. And this is what we call the afikomen. This is the part that the kids love. Someone is tasked with hiding the afikomen. And at the end of the meal, either the kids have to find it or adults have to find it. Whoever hit it, the other team has to be the one to find it. And you can't finish the meal until you found that last piece of matzah, the afikomen. And there are usually prizes given for the people who find it or who don't find it. You've got the right idea. You wrapped it up. Okay. The most important part of the Seder is unfortunately the part I'm going to spend the least time on right now, is Magid, is telling over the story. And you can do it in a number of different ways. You can do it with the text of the Haggadah, but this is where people get to get creative. How are they going to tell over the story in different ways? So for example, Maddie, what did you say before about the videos? Yeah. So Magid telling over starts with the 4 questions. Starts off with usually the youngest child asking 4 questions about the Seder, and that's on page 14 in the Haggadah. Yeah. And I'm super excited that my daughter is going to do this year. And it's a kind of formulaic thing, and this comes from the Talmud. Why on all other nights do we eat either leavened bread or matzah? But on this night, we eat only matzah. Why on all other nights do we eat all kinds of vegetables, but tonight we eat maror, we eat bitter herbs? Why on all other nights do we not dip our vegetables even once? This question is a little confusing, but on this night we dip twice. We did one of the dippings in the salt water. On all other nights we eat either sitting upright or reclining, but on this night we recline. That's a strange question. So the Seder is often believed to be modeled on something called the Roman Symposium. From the times of the Roman Empire, this ornate meal that scholars would have We can picture the Romans kind of reclining on couches as their servants feed them grapes or something like that. So probably the original Seders were actually done in that position, in a more literal recline. Um, Again, acting like what royalty looked like at a certain time. Today, you'll see a lot of people put pillows on the chair behind them and recline into them to try to be comfortable. But the four questions also have a very distinct melody that we'll do the first one together. If you know it, pick it up, and it's transliterated on page 14. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot mikol halelot shebechol halelot anu ochlin chametz umatzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah. You probably had like the more man ishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot. It's like they call that in Yiddish the learning steiger. That's like the melody that yeshiva that used to study texts. But that's not so the way so many people say it today. That comes from the Torah, the idea that your children will ask you questions as you do things. That the Seder is based around them asking questions. Because 4 times the Torah mentions when your children ask you, "What is this?" and you explain, "God took us from Egypt, from slavery to freedom." So that's where that idea comes from. So jump past telling the story part and look at some of the ritual. After we finish telling the story, and there are a lot of good texts in there, we wash our hands again, this time with a blessing, and then we get to the matzah. So everyone look at the matzah. Take a little piece of the matzah. Any of the matzahs, any of the ones on the plate. Take a little piece of the matzah. And we turn to page 59 in the Haggadah. Don't eat it yet. And there are 2 brachot that we say on 59. One of them is very familiar. That's the afikomen. It's from over here. And we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav mitzivanu al achilat matzah. And then you crunch. And that moment at the Seder is usually the first time you've eaten real matzah for the year. This one has a lot of flavor to it. It's egg and I think it's egg and onion matzah. I said I wouldn't actually eat it. I wouldn't eat this on Passover. No, it's not kosher for Passover matzah. You like it? Sorry. Okay. So then we get into the maror, the bitter herbs. Now, every family has a different tradition about doing this. This is the way that my family did it. My warning is this stuff is strong, or it could be. You have the little horseradish slices. Take a slice of the horseradish and put some of the charoset on top of it. Just those 2 things by themselves. The sliced horseradish, and put the charoset on top of it, the red stuff. Yeah, no, not the matzah yet. Not the matzah yet. Don't eat it yet. There are extra forks over there if you want. And if you think this one's hard, wait till you get to the next one. Don't eat it yet. No matzah. No matzah. So on page 60, say the blessing for eating maror. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat maror. Now you eat it. What do you think? How's everyone doing with that? Wait till you try the grated stuff. Yeah, I use the karoset with it. Don't. Yeah. Well, we're gonna get to the Hillel sandwich. Now, don't rub your eyes, by the way. No one rub their eyes. Yes. Okay. So the next step. If you thought that part was complicated, every person is. You okay? Every person is gonna need 2 pieces of matzah. This is a strength test. 2 pieces of matzah. Now you're gonna take the grated maror. You're gonna make a sandwich of 2 pieces of matzah, grated maror, and charoset in the middle. And this represents the way the Korban Pesach, the Passover sacrifice, was eaten with matzah and bitter herbs. The charoset stands in for the lamb. So it looks something like this. So you take. It's okay if it's broken. I put the. Yeah. Yes, we do. Here we go. Pass it around if you need more matzah.
No, you don't want them. Oh my God.
So you load up your sandwich. Yep, the grated horseradish. The grated horseradish. And we say on 62, Zecher lemikdash kehillel. This reminds us of what the sage Hillel did during the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. Kena sa Hillel bisman shebeit HaMikdash haya kayam haya korech. He would make a sandwich of Pesach, the korban, the Passover sacrifice, matzah umaror, ochel biyachad, and eat them together, lekayem masha ne'amar, to fulfill that which is written, al matzot umerorim yochluhu, as it tells us in Exodus. You should eat it together with matzah and bitter herbs. And then you eat. You like that one better? I actually very much like maror, but I like strong flavors. Sorry, Bunny. It's actually the first time I made charoset. Usually I don't get tasked with that ability, so I looked for a recipe this morning and found this one. This one works. Mm-hmm. Again, it's again family traditions passed down. So after the Hillel sandwich, we have the big festive meal. And after the meal, which takes a long time, there's actually more to the Seder. There is Berkat Hamazon, the grace after meals. There are 2 more cups of wine, one of them with Berkat Hamazon. There is welcoming Elijah, Eliyahu, opening the door to see if he is there. And there is the last 2 steps of the Seder, Hallel and Nirtza, singing these songs of joy, songs of happiness. And some of them are texts that we sing from Psalms as part of the Siddur, as part of services, and some of them are distinct for the Passover Seder itself. So, for example, if you look all the way at the end of this book, there's the song Echad Miyodea, who knows one? Yeah, I guess you do. What is one? One is Hashem. One is Hashem. You know that song. So we do it in here in my house. Actually, we do it in Yiddish. That was one of our distinct customs. That I always liked. And then the very end of the Seder, the last thing we do, we sing a song that we use a number of times, and it's on page 85. The Seder ends. Chasal Sidor Pesach Kihilchato, concluded as the Pesach Seder, finished down to the last detail with all its laws and customs. As we've been able to conduct this Seder, so may we someday perform it in Jerusalem. Pure one who dwells in the palace, reference to God, support your congregation, your people, countless in number. May you soon lead the offshoots of your stock, bringing the redeemed to Zion in joy. And we end with L'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, which is our eternal prayer. Again, referencing back to what I said at the beginning, that even though we're celebrating one redemption, the freedom from slavery in Egypt, we believe that we are still in galut, we are still in exile, and the world is still in this state of galut, this very imperfect, this very damaged, this very broken world. And in traditional terms, we ask God to take us back to Jerusalem, to take us back to Jerusalem. That's what Jews have asked for 2,000 years. But however we want to interpret the messianic future, that is what we look forward to as we end the Seder. So that was a very fast run through of the Seder. Any questions? So one thing I said, if you would like a Seder to go to, email me and I will make sure that you have Seders to go to for this year. And it's been a pleasure teaching you all tonight. Feel free to eat some more because there's a lot of it left, or take it home if you want. And I'm going to be teaching this class again in a few weeks when we talk about Talmud. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Heidi and Harris.
Thank you, Rabbi Wolf.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Could you guys hear?
Yeah.
Yep.
No, the Haggadot we have to keep here.